When I was at Nexient, over 7 years, we doubled our price. And the way we talked about it was we would take our revenue in each month or quarter and divide it by the total hours. So it was like a true blended average price per hour. When I started, we were under 60 US per hour, and when we sold in 2021, we were over 120. So we just roughly doubled over 7 years. Truth is, it was probably the hardest 7 years of my career. And it's not really about changing prices. So while there's conversations about changing prices, I think in order to change prices, you have to change almost everything else in your firm. And that's what I learned at Nexian over that period. For us, we were pretty much a staff augmentation firm when I joined. And by the time we sold the company, we were a strategic partner to Fortune 500 clients. And so it took a lot of change to get to there. But that's what allowed us to move from under 60 to over 120 per hour. So I'm looking forward to diving in. I'm Mark Orttung. I'm CEO of Projectworks. And I'm very excited to have our two guests, Jacob, who's a regular, who's going to be our host and keep us to time. And then Ryan, who I've worked with across a number of different companies. He's a partner at Arminino and leads their new business development in the area of sort of recurring revenue, as well as he's got just a wealth of experience. So welcome, Ryan. Um,
Thank you, Mark. Great to see you.
yeah, great to have you. Question to dive in. You have seen lots of different firms, both clients and ones you've been a part of. What's the biggest pricing mistake you've seen? And I'd encourage the audience, if you guys have examples as well, please add them to the chat.
Yeah, I'd love to see the audience examples in the chat too. That's helpful too. I like feeding off of that. But I'd say the greatest mistake that leaders can make related to pricing is not being intentional about it. Meaning, if you have an accidental pricing, you inherited it, your client told you what it should be, you got there because it just happened to be what the competitors were charging or what you saw on one engagement, and then you kept doing it over and over again. The accidental pricing is probably not the right strategy. I heard it said that pricing is the purest expression of your value, and if that's the case, you better understand your value to know what you should price.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really crisp way of putting it, that it's a reflection of your value. Uh, I like that. Um, Yeah, question. Curious if the chat is working. Maybe somebody that's not, because we've had that happen once. So maybe somebody that's not one of us three, put something in the chat. We'll just see if it's going. Um, and
Cool.
yeah, all right. Thank you,
See
Ben.
you, Ben.
It does work. All right. Awesome. So, Jacob, I think you may have had some questions for
Yeah.
us and for the
Yeah,
audience.
let's kick off with I want to open it up with some myth busting around pricing obviously is a hot topic, a spicy topic. And I want to kind of dive in and perhaps break a few bust a few myths. So Ryan and Mark and to our audience as well. I'm curious if you want to answer these questions as we go. A few little true or false to kick things off. So first one, true or false, clients leave when you raise prices.
False.
False. And then it depends because I'm a consulting guy by training and by nature.
What's the dependent thing?
Depends is probably how you handle it. Meaning, does the client feel your value? Do they understand what you're doing? Do they understand that, what their alternatives are on the market? If not, then that is a risk, right? But if you're
Yeah.
communicating those things, then they're probably not going anywhere.
Nice.
Yeah, the other
True or
thing,
false? Oh, sorry, no.
one quick note on that. I think it's really hard to raise prices on your current customers, so you can do it, but only a little. Many of the people that were paying us 120 were not with us when we were at 60. And so if you introduce yourself and your value to somebody new, they're happy to look at you that way. But if you introduce yourself to somebody you're already working with, you gotta move them along. It's quite challenging.
Mm,
And maybe don't
mm.
just send them an email and hope and pray. That's probably a bad idea also.
Yeah.
Maybe don't do what David said. Don't try and raise the prices mid-project.
Yes.
Second one. So everyone's doing performance-based pricing. True or false?
False.
False. I'd hazard a guess that a lot of people don't even know what performance-based or value-based pricing is, but they should if they don't.
What is it, Ryan? Tell us.
Well, I think I kind of set it up top as one, it's having a clear understanding of the value that you're creating for your client in the engagement, whatever that might be, whether it's a project that's a recurring engagement. What is it that they are extracting from it that makes you important to them? Because if you understand that, then you can understand your worth, your team's worth, the outcome's worth. Clients don't so much care about the inputs. The hours matter to you. They may not matter to them. What they're usually looking for is some sort of an output in most cases.
And so performance-based pricing will be tying some component of how you price the project to that outcome.
Yeah.
I think it falls to,
question.
well, I think there's two problems with it that I've seen why everybody isn't doing it, because I think we'd all prefer to do it. One, it's complicated. So, you want to say we did this project and your profit margin went up by 3 points and we want a share of that. And the client will come back and say, well, all these other things changed too. Are we sure you did it? And the other one is, what have you done for me lately? So you do this year one, everybody's happy. You've lowered prices or lowered their cost or raised their revenue. And then for year two, they're like, okay, that's the new baseline. What are you going to do now to earn more? And you may still need to do the same amount of work to keep that baseline, but they don't want to pay for it now. So tricky.
I'm going to touch on one of the points you made, Mark. True or false? Everyone should be doing performance-based pricing.
I'm going to go with false.
Right?
I'm going to say yes, and it depends again. And I say that because it probably depends on the type of services you're providing and your clientele. And if you're a multi-service firm, I suspect that, looking at the attendees here today and people who might be listening, we probably have lots of different type of professional services firms, consulting firms that are paying attention, right? And so how you package and bundle your services, and describe the value, the answer is maybe it's not all of your services, but maybe it's some.
I'm curious actually for the audience here. Just drop in the chat either a yes or a no. Have you been doing some kind of performance-based pricing in the last, say, 12 months or so? It'd be interesting to see. Next one for you both, Ryan and Mark. If it saves them money, clients will pay more.
True.
Potentially. And I'll say it that way because if it saves them money, they may pay more, but they may also see it as lower value too. They may see it as declining in value over time, right? So it goes back to the framing and the communication, I think.
Yeah, I do think there's like this fundamental law of pricing that if you can really be crisp about the value you're giving your client and you're charging 20% of it, they're generally going to be good with it, right? If you're charging more than 100% of what you're giving them, they should be really unhappy about it, right? And so really trying to know what that number is something you should have at every point so that you kind of keep yourself in maybe it's between 10 and 30%, you're in a really pretty safe zone. Above 50%, you're getting a little less safe, and above 100, you're probably out.
Yeah, it's a nice way of thinking about it. Next one is time and materials-based pricing is becoming obsolete. True or false?
False.
I'd say false. I don't think it's going to become obsolete, but I do think what you're seeing is a rapid shift in different business models in professional services across the board. You are seeing firms in all different types, whether it's you see law firms changing the engagement models they work in, consulting firms and engagement models. You see technology-enabled accounting firms and consulting firms. You see all different types that are changing the expectations in the industry, and you see clients also who over the last 10 plus years have gotten used to SaaS-based pricing models and so forth for their software and for other things where you have things bundled in, that many firms are testing those types of engagements. And so I think you'll see a rapid increase in that, but it probably won't change time materials entirely in all industries for sure, but it'll definitely shift the ratio. Is my opinion.
Yeah, my take is I think when things are uncertain, then often people are willing to think about it as time and materials because they don't even know at the beginning of the engagement exactly what they're asking for or exactly what the result will be. Um, and times are really uncertain right now. I don't know if we did a conference last week and I used this slide from the World Uncertainty Index. It's basically a group that looks at every central bank's briefing and they count the number of times the word uncertain shows up. And the chart was crazy. It was like, like 5 or 6 times where it had ever been in the past.
I
So,
talk to a lot of CEOs and CFOs on a regular basis. The number one word that I've heard in the last 3 to 6 months is uncertainty, and forecasting is hard. And so therefore, how does that affect your pricing? I think David in the chat here says it right. He says if you're saving the client money, you're increasing your value to them as a trusted advisor and should enjoy more repeat business. That's a key point, right? And so if you can communicate that value and the client can forecast that value, then they're probably going to pay what you're asking them to pay, right? But forecasting and uncertainty are things that all of our clients are probably feeling right now.
It's a good segue, uncertainty, into this final true or false. You can't raise prices in a downturn.
false.
False.
I think,
Confident false.
yeah, I think if your client has a real problem and you can solve it in a meaningful way, they're happy to pay and they might even pay more. So the problems can be more painful in a downturn, potentially. They've got cash issues, they've got cost issues. So if you happen to have a solution to that, they might be really open to it because they don't have any alternatives,
And
potentially.
I know we have probably different types of firms on this webinar too, with different types of services. So some of those you might actually see as counter-cyclical services too. There are certain services that are actually more valuable in a downturn, right? If you know how to advise and deal with certain cyclical industries in a downturn, or you have a particular scenario about helping clients wind down elements of a business or those type of things, there are things that are actually more valuable when the macro climate is in decline. And so the key for professional service firms is to move where it's hot, right? To stay and get engaged in where it's hot, and then adjust your pricing accordingly.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for true or false. Over to you, Mark, for workshop mode, and I'll bring up the 3 arcs slide to kick things off, eh?
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so today for the workshop segment, we are going to try something a little bit different. I thought I'd start with a thought experiment. So the question for the audience to add to the chat is, if we were to call your biggest client today or tomorrow without you on the phone or without you on the call, and say, why do you buy from this company? Why do you buy from this firm? What would their answer be? And I partly put this in because of personal experience. When I was first at Nexian, I had an advisor. As part of his willingness to join as an advisor, he wanted to go talk to customers without me and my team. And he asked them this, why do you buy from Nexiant? We thought we were this great strategic partner. He came back and said they kind of summarized it all as they're cheap, their people are pretty good, and they do what we want, which was really deflating to hear at the time. But it was also very informative that hey, we had a lot of work to do. If we wanted to truly be strategic, we weren't there, and we had work to do. So yeah, what would people? So I don't know, Ryan, what your take is on that with some of the firms you've been with. Why do people buy from them? I don't know which one you want to speak on behalf of, either a client or maybe Arminino or someone else.
Well, I think you kind of nailed it, right? And it's something that we probably all learned the hard way, right? Is understanding why the client is actually buying from you is probably the most important thing any of us in professional services can do, right? Having that awareness, just hearing what they say. And so, if you don't have that, then you probably doesn't matter what what you think about the price, right? And so I think you're right. And if you have that kind of ongoing diagnostic where you're constantly asking that question, you're going to get maybe different answers over time too. So
Mm.
so what might have been important last month may not be important in 6 months. And it's certainly the things that the client said last year aren't relevant as well. And so I wish I would have learned that earlier, right? 15 plus years ago. There's probably a lot of things that we'll talk about today that you wish you would have learned earlier on. You learned the hard way, but being willing to ask your client is important. The other one that why they value you. The second one was who else are they working with and why do they value them?
That's a great
Mm.
question.
Because if you understand what the other professional services firms that your clients are spending money with, spending time with, that what value do they bring, then it helps you understand your place in their ecosystem. Because none of us are alone in the ecosystem, and I think that's something that's hard for maybe our own self-worth or our own company worth to look at. But the reality is, clients are probably buying services and products from a lot of people. So do we
Yeah.
want to be the can of peas on the shelf that people just walk past when they go to something else, or do you want to differentiate yourself somehow and understand why you're a value?
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. Yeah, I didn't, it's funny, I didn't seek this out. It kind of was brought to me, and then when I got the answer, it was like, oh,
Oh,
okay. But then I realized how important it was because it was so bad. Yeah. So,
Do
uh,
you feel like your clients will ever tell you face to face if you ask them directly? Or is there something unique about having someone separate from the relationship asking?
I think there's some value to having someone other than you ask, and particularly
Mm,
this guy Ralph Shigenda that did it for us was really experienced working with customers and just really was able to get them to relax and just get comfortable enough to just say what they were thinking. So there's a
mm,
little bit. Not only is it not me or my team, but it was also somebody pretty
mm,
talented at getting the right answer to come back or the true answer.
mm.
Because yeah.
having a known name like that, who's somebody who has been a board member of a lot of big brand name companies and so forth, is a helpful thing too, Mark.
Yes,
That's a real
yes.
one. I don't know that everybody on the audience is going to have that person, but I agree with you. Is that having a third party ask the question, would you recommend this firm to somebody else? That's the age old net promoter score question, right? The
Mm.
NPS score, right? But if you don't do that, it's worth it. Jacob, you asked the question, would you ask it yourself? I actually love it. Like I love sitting down with a
Mm,
client exec and just saying, what is it that originally drew you to us? How did you hear about us originally? What's a value next to you? What's on your roadmap for next year? Are you using somebody else for that? Why? And you can't do that with every relationship, right? Some clients will tell you to go fly a kite. That's okay. That's fine.
mm,
Some will tell you that will open the book and lay down on the couch and tell you everything. Those are the
mm.
ones you want to hear.
Yeah.
Nice. I mean, it's certainly a muscle you should build. And if you never ask, you'll never get to the point where you get an honest answer. So here for that, absolutely. It just reminds me that it reminds me of a comment one of my university lecturers made way back in the day when he was talking about brand overall. I studied design and marketing, and he said your brand is how your customers talk about you when you're not in the room. I think it's a pretty
Mm.
true measure of your value at that point.
Yeah, I like that. Let's dive into the three arcs. Jacob, I don't know if you put it in the chat.
Sorry, I brought it up a touch early, but here it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I thought I would maybe just introduce each of the three arcs one by one. We can kind of chat about them. So we began, this is something we applied when I was at Nexian, and it was actually kind of the model that drove us from that less than $60 an hour, their cheap staff augmentation, to becoming a much more strategic partner. So this first inner arc is what you do today as the majority of your work. So when we started down this journey, that for us was really staff augmentation engineering. We had talented engineers. They were inexpensive. You could have two or three of them join your project. You could manage them. And we didn't, we added value by finding them and training them, but we weren't leading them. We weren't taking on a big chunk of your project. And so that was not a service that was going to allow us to raise prices. So we and we talk about this as kind of a price stagnation zone. So before we get into the other two, be curious to hear like what percentage of people's practices are in this core inner arc, if you will. Ryan, I don't know if you want to think about that for or which context, but I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
I can jump in a little bit. When Arminino, we're a very diversified firm, so we have many services across tax, accounting, audit, and consulting service, and our consulting business is very diverse as well. But I think about most of the professional services firms that we work with that are clients of our firm, and most of those are 2 to 3 kind of core services, if you maybe one key focus area. And so if you understand your client mix there, well, I think that's kind of where you're really thinking about, what are the trends that clients are facing in those core services. What walls are they up against? That's a really good thing to understand, because it, as you're part of your transition into your next arc too, I at least in my view.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so it's a good segue into the next arc. So the middle arc is differentiated services, and these typically you have done one or two engagements, maybe three. So it's not that it's like a crazy idea that you don't know how to do or you couldn't do, but it's one, maybe it's a case study on your website because it was the
Mm-hmm.
coolest engagement you've done. For us, we would typically have the leaders of our practices would be the billable people on this because it would be them effectively figuring out a new motion and a new playbook for this new type of services. So for us, we were moving from this kind of engineering staff augmentation into engineering teams. So we were moving to where we also brought a manager to the engagement. Our engineers worked for our manager, and there was a real difference in that we were now taking on a unit of work rather than just getting directions every couple of days on what an individual would do. As a team, we were going to take on a chunk of what was going to get built, um, and so this allowed us to differentiate our services a little bit. And yeah, it was for us, it was the first part of the journey that really began to lift the prices. Maybe I'll pause, Ryan, and see what your take
I
is
was
on
gonna
this one.
jump in there, and this model is that I like it because it's a really simplified kind of approach. It's a good framework to think about, and there are others like this that maybe the listeners could look up to. There's a professor a professor at Harvard called Dasan Ariandas, who talks about the cycle of commoditization. It's a
Mm,
nice 4 blocker. There's videos out there on YouTube and so forth to look at, but really it talks about how you move from a net new differentiated service that requires that high-end gray hair kind of person that's delivering it, or whatever else. You move it into a more commoditized service where it talks about, it becomes a cash cow over time. And then maybe as you start giving away more and there's more competitors, it moves into kind of the give me a break zone where people want, they ask you for the price decrease for it because everybody's doing it, and so you end up putting more money into it and get more freebies to give it away, which then moves you into the you're almost at death for that service, right? Because you were giving away so much just to keep the client that it's not going to be there. So how do you take that service that's probably one of your core, move it back up into a differentiated zone in this model, right? And
mhm.
re-engage that something net new that makes it high value again, right? And so in a lot of cases, our services, any of the services that any of the listeners might be delivering, my own, yours, Mark, you think about what we might do is you might at different times move through the arcs too, right? And move up and down, I suppose, which is
Mm,
kind of like, Professor Narayandas, like he says, you might move through the 4 quadrants on the screen as well. So I think it's interesting to think about and then know where you are for any one customer, any one subservice as well.
yeah, I
I've got a
like that.
question for you, Ryan, on that, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think about, because obviously you see a bunch of professional services firms as clients in your consulting business that you
We do.
mentioned. Uh, and I'm curious how you see the role of small and mid-sized firms, particularly on that kind of commodity to specialized spectrum that you described. Is there a particular place that they should own and focus on?
I think most of the consulting leaders listening can probably laugh and just say, and again, it depends, right? And why do you say that? Because are are they specialized in a specific industry? Are they specialized in a specific technical capability? Are they specialized in a specific advisory capability? What's the thing that's differentiating them, right? That, to Mark's point here, and could you be an SMB, a 10-person firm, and have a really, really differentiated special skill set that nobody has? The answer is 100%. Could you also be a 10-person small consulting firm that does something that's fairly commoditized and has a unique way of delivering it? Or something else that might be, a lot of people doing it, but you're doing it in a niche industry, or you're doing it in a space where you have a couple of really good clients because you had a relationship with them for a long time. I think understanding that goes back to the question about understanding the value and your positioning that you and why your clients do business with you, because then you kind of understand where on the spectrum you might be too. I don't know if that answers your question, Jacob, but I think it's kind of directionally aligned.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about many of the Projectworks customers that I've spoken with, and more often than not, they are living in a kind of consistent, differentiated space and battling with the challenge of working across these three arcs and as differentiated services, so they become commoditized, and then they're constantly looking for something new. But it feels like to me there's an opportunity for smaller mid firms in particular to uh, own the differentiated space before those become commodity in much larger practices over time.
I
But in some
100%
ways, the,
agree.
the small could make you more nimble too, to adjust quicker to the trends. But it
That's
is
right.
that
Yeah.
intestinal fortitude of like, hey, am I willing to make a decision on not just pricing, but also on service or packaging or bundling or go to market that allows you to do the pricing, right? And that's just an intestinal fortitude of the leader of the firm to say, am I willing to make the change? Like Mark talked about earlier, it was gut wrenching to make those big changes. We've all had them. We've all had those moments. Are you able to make that difficult decision?
I might actually, Jacob, say rather than it's an opportunity, I might say it's an imperative.
That's true.
If you are a small or medium firm, you need to be out in front of the global firms because if you're doing what they're doing, they're very likely going to win, right? So you need to be pushing the boundaries on value, on new things, applying new technologies, applying new techniques to your client's business. That I don't know, that was always the feeling I had is that we had to stay. I like to look at the technology adoption curve that Jeffrey Moore used, and I always wanted to be in a place where we were with the early adopters and then riding up the curve. And I felt like when we got to the mainstream, that's where the GSIs would start buying firms like us. And so we would have the option to either sell to them or we would need to reinvent ourselves and find something else that's back earlier in the curve with the early adopters. And so as long as we could keep reinventing ourselves, we could do that. But if we wound up in the mainstream or the late mainstream, I thought we'd be kind of screwed, to be honest, because we'd be competing with the top 10 firms and they have way more resources and way better reach. So, yeah, I'd call it an imperative.
I
It
like that,
feels like
Mark, a
it's
lot, because if we go back to the original conversation, if we said if pricing is your positioning or your value, right? If we're equivalating those earlier, and you're probably not going to compete with those larger firms on scale as part of your value proposition, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to think about, okay, am I competing on my confidence to deliver something that is truly unique in that space versus a commodity, right? And so what is that what's my confidence in the value that I'm delivering in that case?
Yeah.
Then that's a value to a client.
Yeah.
feels like that part of the adoption curve is in ways like a um, very similar to these three arcs. And that loop that you talked about, Mark, is going from kind of core services back down to potentially category creating services. And we haven't touched on that yet. I'm curious what that looked like when you came back to the very start, the very beginnings of that bell curve, and you look for category creation.
Yeah. So, yeah, great segue. The third one, this category creating services, typically is something that you aspire to. But there's no obligation, in my mind, on this one to even currently be able to do this. So in our world, when we first started on this, we had basically staff aug engineering and then engineering teams. What we aspired to was this idea of a product team, which back when we were starting this was not yet really an offering from many consulting firms. So the idea of an 8 or 10 person agile pod that had engineering leadership, design leadership, and product management leadership and could operate effectively. What we were trying to do was bottle up how a startup worked and bring that to the Fortune 500. So if you want to bring a new product to market or bring a new customer facing application to market in the way that a startup would, that was the service we were offering you. And so in the beginning, we just hoped we could do it. Um, as we got more of our business into differentiated services, we actually again took our leaders. We had a leader for product management, a leader for design, and a leader for engineering, and they were the first team that actually did this for a client. We talked a long running client into doing it, and that became, in a way, it sort of moved down to become our differentiated services. So you're always sort of trying to take that one that you dream about and get enough work that it becomes your middle arc, and you want to get enough of your middle arc going so that it becomes your core. And then you dream up another crazy idea that's even crazier to put on your category creating service. So you should always be reinventing. And if anything, I think the pace is a lot faster today than it was a few years ago, just because of the pace of AI, the pace of technology. Like, you need to really be moving this thing quickly. One other just comment on mechanics. The way we measured this, so we could look, so for example, how many of our engagements do our people report to our manager? We could count that up and figure out what percent of our business that was. And then how many of our engagements have that and have a product manager, a designer, and an engineering leader on the same team. But the way we did this, Colin, who led delivery for me, would count it up by hand in a spreadsheet. And it's one of those many pain points I felt at Nexient that led me to come to Projectworks, because with the proper platform, you could just drop a couple of custom fields on your projects and have everybody on the team mark down those things we were measuring and pop out a report automatically, and save someone like Colin, like literally a couple days worth of manual chugging through the spreadsheet, looking at all the statements of work, talking to the project managers, trying to figure out which of these three arcs did each project fit into. That's something you should have constant visibility into, and especially today as the pace goes faster and faster and faster, something you should be looking at.
Mark, I can't agree more. And I think if we tie back to the theme of today, right, we talk about pricing across the board. Pricing, because of that pace of change, is faster than it's ever been. And I think the last couple of years, and even the last 6-12 months, it has increased at levels that most of the CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, COOs that I'm talking to saying that they're seeing dramatic increase in the change that technology and that business models are seeing out there. That means that you have to go through this arc and this cycle faster also. And you can't just think about pricing as a once a year activity or every few years. I think there's a lot of professional services firms out there who used to just think, oh, I'd set a price and it lasts for a long time, maybe multiple years and so forth. And you kind of even alluded to that with your conversation about Nexient, about some of the things lasted for a long time and so forth. I don't think that's even an option anymore. You
Yeah.
use the word imperative. I think it's it's an imperative. I think it's a maybe an existential threat if you're not thinking about these things, because I can guarantee you that new market entrants are thinking about those things, that are tech enabled professional services firms, that are platform enabled firms, that are looking to disrupt anybody who's in a traditional professional services space.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not thinking about the way you go to market, your value, your pricing on a regular basis, and what the client's alternatives are, then you're probably already extinct and you don't know it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. We used to think about these three arcs cycling on about an annual basis. And now I wonder, is it like twice a year, quarterly? Like, how often do you need to be looking at what your services are and whether they're differentiated or not anymore? I'm curious if, what your take is on that.
it probably depends on the sub-segment of professional services that you're in, but when you look at the amount of, well, and you can read out, the news out there, right? You can see the amount of spend that's going on by VC and PE firms in the professional services space that is driving both technology improvements, net new types of services, changes to business models at rates that I haven't seen in the last 25 years. So I think if you're not looking at it, even a cursory, you may not fully do the full, deep dive, strategic run through every quarter, but you at least have to be aware of what's going on with your client decision cycles pretty frequently, because they'll tell you, or by either staying with you, changing vendors on you, or making the decision for you if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that's I think adding more pressure is some of the classic tech companies are beginning to wander into services too. If you look at like a Palantir or an OpenAI, they're also offering services. Probably not quite what you might get from a global GSI or somebody like that, but they're definitely pushing the envelope on what they offer as well. So it's everybody's pushing on this.
Professional services doesn't mean a herd of people in khakis and polos anymore. It may mean one person and a set of AI enabled tools to go and do the outcome of 2 or 3 or 10 people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In many cases.
If, as we kind of near wrapping things up, I'm just curious for you both, Mark and Ryan, what bit of advice would you give to founders, executives of small and mid-sized consulting firms that are looking at this going, yes, I get it. I know I have to do this. How do I turn that kind of conceptual thinking into practical plans for 2026? How do I kind of codify that in some way so we're ensuring that we're straddling those 3 arcs appropriately through the year?
One, I'd say make sure you and your leadership team are aligned that you even know what your 3 arcs are.
Yeah.
If you haven't, had those conversations, it's illuminating. We had a lot of arguments about it. It wasn't just starting out like this is super clear, super easy. It took us some time as a team to figure it out. And then two, can you measure it? And can you measure it
Mm.
quickly? So that because if this pace is really going to go that fast, you can't you can't have your most valuable delivery person spending 2 or 3 days in a spreadsheet to
Mm.
get to where do you stand today if you got to look at this every quarter or twice a year.
Maybe a couple of key takeaways might be that the narrative matters, right? So what I say I mean that the clients buy impact, not inputs. So if you know what the impact is that you're making, that's probably going to drive your pricing. So then what do? We used to say drive pricing annually. We talked about that. You're going to be looking at it on a much more frequent basis, and it probably depends on your service. Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it what is it by client, by sub service that you might be? Align the price to value would be the next thing that I would say. Don't simplify your choices. Make it easy for a client to make the decision so that they're not guessing on how many hours, how many dollars they might spend with you, right? And help them understand where on the arc strategy they are, and then be confident. Protect your price. Don't be afraid. Like if you have done those other exercises, protect the outcome, protect for your own firm by understanding your own value and be confident in it.
Yeah, it seems
Oh, and
key.
Mark said it earlier. Talk to your clients. Talk to your customers.
Yeah. And if you can get a third party to do it, and as Jacob said, your brand will come out what they say when you're not there, when you're
Get
not
the
in the
validated
room.
input.
Yeah, and I actually really like Ryan's perspective on who else is in this environment and what are you buying from them and why, like, and sort of where do I stack up on which one's more valuable, and yeah, because there is an ecosystem. All of these large clients have a minimum of 4 or 5 partners that they're working with, and yeah, it's always fascinating to know who else is there.
That was a little bit of a Back to the Future moment for me, Mark, because that was one that it was brought to this out by this conversation. It was probably said to me by a CEO, my boss, probably 20 years ago to me, is like, You got to know, ask them directly. You got to understand where else they're buying. How do you increase your share of wallet of all the professional services spend that they have on their plate? Ask them
Yeah.
where they're spending their money, and you'll know where you stand.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
oh, okay.
fascinating. We
I have
had
to be.
a
I had to learn to be more bold at the time, right? And I
yeah,
think that's something we can all learn.
we had a utility client where we did a lot of the software, and our client partner got quite good at learning who else was in the environment and actually got to know all the other sort of leaders of the other firms. And there it felt pretty good because there would be people that were like modeling weather or modeling the electric grid and things that we just were never going to go do. So it did feel like we were pretty valuable to them because we were the main one in the software space. But it was kind of wild to me that she and these they would get together and talk about it. Like they were from effectively competing consulting firms, but they had each carved out a niche that was so different that they were
Mm,
all comfortable talking to each other. And we learned a ton. Um,
Smart.
yeah.
nice one. That's about all we have time for. So over to you to wrap things up, Mark.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again. Don't miss our final Z Suite episode of 2025, which is in 2 weeks. I'm going to talk to Materialize Labs founder Alex Nordlinger, and we're going to talk about making bad hires and how to fix that. So we'll pop a URL into the chat for that. I'd love to see you then. Until next time, keep zigging and zagging. Thank you.